John Wiley Herod taught phys ed and drove the school bus for the Dallas County High School in Plantersville, Alabama in 1954. Before that, he was a pilot in the U.S. Army Air Corps and flew fighters in World War II. 1954, I was a part-time student pastor at the Plantersville Methodist Church. And that's where I met John Wiley. He was not an active member of the church, rarely came. His father was. His father was very active in the church. He was chairman of the official board, hardly ever missed a Sunday. John Wiley didn't have much use for the church, and I suppose that my 2 years in Korea during the Korean War helped me understand John, and so we had a friendly relationship. We just didn't see each other that often. I do remember one particular Saturday afternoon that I spent with John Wiley. I had mentioned in passing one time that I wondered what the little community of Plantersville looked like from the air. One afternoon he called me and he said, you want to see? And I said, sure. John Wiley had, after the war was over, he had scrounged around and got a lot of surplus parts and had assembled his own airplane. When I met him that afternoon and at his house and we drove over to the pasture, I saw what he was talking about. He kept the plane in an open shed. One wing was blue, as I remember. The other one was yellow, and I do remember a red tail assembly. And he had assembled the plane himself from the surplus parts. He just hadn't gotten around to painting it. I wish I had a picture of it. It's hard to describe it. I have since then, although he didn't talk much about what kind of a plane it was, and frankly at that point I wasn't that interested. Since then I have identified it. I think it's what was known as the Texan T6 trainer. The specifications for the plane that I looked up said that it's about a 49-foot wingspan and about 29-30 feet long, and that pretty close to what, and the profile, pretty close to what John Wiley's plane looked like. We had a problem to start with because the plane was in an open pasture, active pasture, and we had to chase the cows. They'd come up into that end, and we had to chase the cows back into the other end of the pasture before we could take off. We did that, and we proceeded to take off. John started the engine. I crawled into the second seat. Now, in order to take off, there was only one way to do it. We had to fly south over the fence, pasture fence, but under a power line. I kind of held my breath. No problem, though. He cleared the fence under the power line, and we took off. Plantersville at that time was a small community, about 1,500 people. My guess is it's about the same size today. A lot of things don't change. It was a clear day, interesting flight. I was able to identify houses where some of my members lived and places where they worked, and I saw the church and the parsonage. I saw the river. I was able to identify the twists and turns of the river as it went by the town. And I looked up not too long ago, I looked up Plantersville on Google Earth. Saw the same scene. My guess is it's a lot like it was in those days. And I have to tell you, I'm impressed with technology that allows us to do what Google Earth does. But as impressive as the technology is, it doesn't compare with the excitement that I felt that day of flying over the little town, seeing from the air. It was truly a remarkable experience for me. 25, 30 minutes, and we headed back. Well, we started to come back to land. We had to come back in the same way. We had to come back, this time coming in from the south. We had to clear the fence and come onto the power line. But we had a problem. Remember the cows I told you about? Well, they had worked themselves back up to where the landing strip was. And we couldn't land. I didn't know what John Wiley was going to do, but first thing he did is he flew low over the cows, trying to scare them and force them back down to the other end of the pasture. And they paid absolutely no attention to us. They'd heard that plane before, I guess. But so after 2 or 3 attempts to get the cows moved that way, and I had no idea where there was an alternate landing site. But John Wiley took off, and he flew over to his father's house. Now, I said John Herod was a rural mail carrier. He usually wound up his route by early afternoon, and then he would take a nap. And this was mid-late afternoon by this time. So we flew over, and John Wiley buzzed the house. Went around once and twice, and his father came out of the house and looked up and saw the plane. And John Wiley banked the plane, and then he yelled down, "The cows! The cows!" John looked up and said, "What? What?" John Wiley said, "The cows! The cows!" John said, "Oh, okay." And he got into his car, drove over to the pasture, moved the cows back down to the other end of the pasture, and we landed. Came in over that fence, under that power line, me still holding my breath. And John Wiley killed the engine. We taxied to a stop with plenty of room to spare. We must have had 10, 15 feet before we would have hit the fence. I didn't fly with John Herod anymore after that. My Saturday afternoons were really busy and trying to do the work. I only served that church for 1 year. And I presume that John Wiley finally got his plane painted, maybe. I don't know, maybe not. And I wondered if he got his the pasture arranged so that he could land without having to chase the cows. But there again, maybe, maybe not. After all, he had a system worked out. It worked, so why change it? But I can still hear John Wiley from the plane yelling, "The cows! The cows!" And the old man getting in his car and driving over and chasing the cows back. I don't know why anybody would want to change that, because it worked. And I hope you'll admit that it gave me a pretty good story. Don't you think?